Well, apparently, U.S. intelligence is finally trying to get to the bottom of what exactly the origin of the Wu flu happens to be. This is frankly the one thing that I thought that our government would have been able to get right, considering that, there are these spies all over the world doing all sorts of things that, in my opinion, they don't need to be doing. Yet here's an example in which having this huge spy apparatus in the form of the NSA, the CIA, and the DIA, and all these other intelligence agencies that operate around the world, would come in handy, because you would think, we should have had a huge advance notice on what was going on in Wuhan and exactly what happened. And back in, I would think, December, before any of us, even those of us who have been following this closely, knew anything about the virus, the CIA should have known about this, because I'm sure they've got to have plenty of people in a city as big as Wuhan who were realizing that this was going on and who were looking into it. And yet, according to Fox News, they're only now investigating the origins of this virus and are finally starting to look into the Wuhan virology lab that so many of us on the internet have been discussing, because it's right there on Google Maps. We didn't need a huge spying apparatus. We don't have any people on the ground. And when I say we, I just mean, again, random people on YouTube like me or Mr. Mediocre or Chris Martinson. This lab is within walking distance of the so-called wet market that China demolished, because, that was the source of the outbreak, was this wet market, because people were eating bats, and bat soup is bad. And, you might think that there aren't enough people who are blue-pilled enough to still believe that, but I was speaking to one of my professors the other day, and she was just going on about how, China just needs to really get rid of these wet markets. It's a barbaric practice, and it's created all this trouble. And so magically, there's still people in this world who have bought into the disinformation that was being spread, not just by the Chinese government, but by the Western press and the World Health Organization, that this whole thing originated in some kind of, just normal human interactions, nothing insidious going on at all. But, Occam's razor says that, the simplest explanation is usually the best one. And, if you look at, this outbreak seems to have started somewhere in this area of the city of Wuhan. Well, why don't we just look a little bit down the block, just across the bridge from this wet market, and say, there's this level 4 biolab that, keeps all of these very dangerous viruses. Isn't it maybe a little more likely that perhaps someone didn't scrub out properly, didn't wash their hands good enough, and they, leaked the virus out, they carried it out with them and spread it to other people? Maybe this person got off their shift at the lab and then went and bought some bats at the market and spread it around to a bunch of people. That, to me, seems like the simplest explanation. It seemed like the simplest explanation since way back in, I think, January or early February. It's been a long time since I've even talked about this whole thing. And, because to me, it's kind of a foregone conclusion, like that. I talked about it and I moved on because, it seemed pretty obvious. But here we are in, mid to late April, and the White House is, finally getting around to discussing it. I'm glad they are. Somebody needs to call them out. I want the historical record to, reflect the truth, or at least the doubt. I don't want there to be some just, blanket acceptance of, whatever the Communist Party line is. They need to be questioned at some point, even if it does turn out that, somehow magically the Wuhan Institute of Virology, or the other lab, which that's the name I always forget. I think it might be a university there. One of them is at a university, and the other one is just an independent lab that was doubtlessly owned by the government, but it should be mentioned that there are 2 labs in Wuhan. One of which, at least, by the way, has been cited in the past for being a potentially leaky target, or, a place that, a virus could leak out of. Now, this story is still unconfirmed, but it's coming out of a, much more mainstream source, Fox, who is likely to have, actually decent sources within the U.S. government. So if, Fox says that the intel folks are looking into this, I'm sure that that's true. Now, of course, this is a double-edged sword, because the intel folks use their connections in the media both to pass out legitimate leaks, which I tend to think that this is correct, but also more often than not, the intel folks, starting with Operation Mockingbird and on into the present, make these connections with the press. They become sources for the press so that they can use them to dispense their own disinformation. And so I will point out, it is possible that the U.S. government, actually has no indication and no reason to believe that this lab in Wuhan has any connection to the virus outbreak, and they just want to make China look bad. And so they leak things like this to try and, sow the seeds of doubt. This is a similar thing that you see them do to governments that they don't like. But in this case, because, before the U.S. government got involved and said anything about this, I already thought that this whole, lab in Wuhan was very suspect. I'm more likely to believe what they're saying. But that's more because it confirms what I already, suspected, not because I have any real faith in the CIA or the DIA or any of these other intelligence, organizations. Now, another interesting story that I noticed this week that I haven't had a chance to talk about is that a French scientist whose name I can't pronounce, it's Luc Monta something or other. He was the man who discovered the HIV virus, I guess, back in the 80s. And he has taken a look at this virus under a microscope, I presume, and has come to the conclusion that it would have to be man-made, based on the sections that I've discussed before, parts of the genome that look like that they were directly copied and pasted from AIDS. Now, that doesn't mean that this virus is AIDS. It just means that the way that it attaches to cells apparently is taken from the AIDS virus, and AIDS is particularly infectious, which we all know it's pretty easy to get AIDS. And so this virus apparently has a similar, or rather identical, in some people's views, way of attaching to cells. And so I won't get too deep on that since I'm not a scientist and I don't study these things, particularly closely. But I do recognize that this is, somewhat an authority figure, and I do think that there are such things as, people, with authority who should be somewhat respected because they are experts in their field. I just think that most of the authorities who are trotted out before us in the public are not very authoritative. They are, false idols or false shepherds. So, to me, this guy, though, considering his background, seems like a serious scientist who is not just, making this up because he hates China or something like that. And I don't even think that he, I don't think he used the term bioweapon or anything. I think that he said basically what I've been assuming for a while, that, China was experimenting with this virus for whatever purpose. I think he was saying that he thought that this virus was being used to study AIDS or something like that. I don't know about that. But this was being used in research, and it got out by accident. But this was most certainly, it would seem, a man-made virus. It is an alteration of the normal bat coronavirus. Because as I've pointed out in the past, that virus apparently has trouble infecting humans. There's not a whole lot of bat to human spread when it comes to that virus, because the virus just isn't evolved to attack humans. By taking that bit from the AIDS genome and inserting it into this virus, they essentially retooled it to be, a bat virus into being a human virus. That seems to be what this guy was saying. So anyway, that about does it for today. If you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.